Okay, so we've had this Alienware X17 R2 for 3 weeks now. We spent a lot of time on this machine. I've really enjoyed playing with it and using it and having both the i7 and the i9 in the studio. The 3080 Ti has been great, but not much of an improvement over the 3080. So what I want to do tonight is a deep dive on this machine. And as part of that deep dive, we're going to look at the configurations that you may want to choose when you're buying this laptop. We're going to look at how we can tweak this machine to get the best out of it. We're going to look at Alienware Command Center and the profiles that they offer with this system. And we're going to look at the heat, because a lot of people have been mentioning to me that, looking at the reviews and everything, it does run hot. And these 12th gens do run hot. So we're going to look at ways that we can actually improve the heat of this system. And lastly, we're going to look at Msi Afterburner to overclock the GPU and to have the system stats running on top of your game. Because this is another question I get asked all the time, and it's very useful if you do want to monitor the temperatures of your machine whilst you're gaming. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to look at the configurations first. Justin and myself did a stream together to look at the differences between the i7 and the i9 and how well they performed against each other. And now I've spent a lot of hands-on time between them. Here's my take on what you should buy if you're buying this laptop. So firstly, the CPUs, we have a choice of a 12,700 or the 12,900 HK. Now the i9 this year is a £400 increase in price when you select it over the i7 in the UK. Now that's a lot of difference in money. Now if you are paying that extra £400, what are you going to be getting? For a start, the biggest problem with these modern slimline laptops is these chassis can only put out so much heat out of the back of it, and these 12th gen systems need a lot of wattage and a lot of cooling to get the best out of them. So whether you buy the i7 or the i9, you're going to be thermally limited before you hit the maximum clocks of either of these CPUs. And both the i7 and the i9 have the same number of cores and the same number of threads. So realistically, all you would normally be getting is a higher clock speed with the i9, but this chassis can only maintain about 130 watts of maximum CPU load if it's just the CPU you're loading. Now, in my experience, the i9 easily needs 160 watts to get decent frequencies out of the CPU, and it's just not capable in this machine. So for most people, I would recommend just get the i7. The scores on both of these CPUs are out of the world, and the only improvements you're going to get with the i9 are realistically going to be short bursts and single core performance. Now you may know that your workload depends on this, and therefore the i9 could be for you. But otherwise, for most users, especially if you're gaming, get yourself the i7 and save that £400, put it towards something else in your system. Now, one other benefit for the i9 over the i7 is the fact that the chip is unlocked. So if you do plan to do a bit of undervolting or to muck around with the frequencies, then you may want to consider that extra £400. But £400 is a lot of money just to have an unlocked chip. And bear in mind, you're not going to increase the frequencies that much due to the 130 watts maximum output on this chassis. Now, this system does come with the 4 fans, the Element 31 thermal paste on the CPU, and a vapor chamber cooler, and it does do a good job, but there are limits to what this chassis can deal with. So then on to the graphics cards. Now, we've got a choice of the older 3060, the 3070 Ti, and the 3080 Ti. If you're going to be gaming, I would discount the 3060 completely from this laptop. If you're only looking for a 3060, then I would suggest a cheaper laptop in the first place. I wouldn't be spending the amount of money to buy this 12th gen CPU to get a 3060 in it. You can't upgrade it later, you're stuck with that 3060, and I think you're going to end up with buyer's remorse if you choose that model. The only person that may want a 3060 is if you're buying this laptop for more than just gaming, maybe using it for video editing or 3D work, and therefore you're not bothered about the graphics performance so much, but you want that 12th gen CPU, then okay, that makes sense. Otherwise, if you want the 3060, save a fortune and get the X17R1 or maybe the M17R7 or other cheaper 3060 based laptops. So realistically, we have two choices, the 3070 Ti or the 3080 Ti. And in the UK, there's £600 difference between these two cards. Now that £600 will get you a very slightly faster graphics card with a 3080 Ti, but also 8GB more GDR6 memory. Now, if you're gaming at high resolutions, or some more modern games need that extra video memory, or you know that you need a professional task that needs more than the 8GB of GDR6 memory, then you may want to consider that £600 upcharge for the 3080 Ti. But for most people, if you're on the 1080p screen of this laptop, or even a 1440p external monitor, that 3070 Ti is the absolute sweet spot, and that £600 could be put into something else, either in your system or a nice external monitor to go with your laptop. So now with regards to the memory on this laptop, obviously it is removable. If you've watched the review, you've seen that we've obviously taken these chips out. They're 4800 MHz DDR5 RAM sticks, and the only problem you've got at the moment is DDR5 SODIMMs are actually quite difficult to get hold of, and you're not going to get anything faster than is currently available from Dell. So what I would recommend is either get 16 gigabytes if you're just gaming, and then you can upgrade that in the future as DDR5 RAM gets cheaper and slightly better in specification, or 32 gigabytes if you're looking to use this for sort of heavily for gaming and a workload. I wouldn't buy 64 gigabyte on a whim, but if you know you need that for a professional application, then that's fair enough, but it's a massive upcharge to get that 64 gigabytes. So if you don't know if you need that 64 gigabytes, don't buy it now. DDR5 will come down in price as the market matures. Now, talking about the SSDs for this system, if you remember the review, we've got 2 Gen 4 SSD bays, and Dell are finally using Gen 4 drives in their machine this year. So Dell do charge quite a bit extra to upgrade the SSDs when you're configuring your laptop, but at least you know you're going to get a decent Gen 4 drive. So I'd recommend you get at least 1 terabyte, because 512 gigabytes doesn't go anywhere these days. And you're getting a Gen 4 drive anyway, so it's not like you're going to take this drive out and replace it straight away. And then in the second slot, I would buy yourself a drive rather than getting a Dell to put one in, because at least that way you can pick up something decent from Amazon that'll be much cheaper than you can get from Dell. It's incredibly easy to add the SSD in, and it's well worth the money saving to do so. And lastly, I just want to talk screens. Now, if you're gaming on this monitor, 1080p is absolutely fine. But if you're planning to work and play on your monitor, I'm finding 1080p a little bit lacking, especially when we're in 2022 now. There's so many better screen options out there. QHD or 4K would be so much crisper and clearer for work and text purposes. If you're just gaming, I still find 1080p absolutely perfect, especially at 17-inch. But between the two 1080p models, if you are planning to game a lot on this internal screen, get the 360Hz screen. The colour gamut's better, it's much more fluid, it's a really vibrant screen, it's an absolutely lovely screen to use. It's what I've got here on this laptop, and that would be my choice if I was choosing this and gaming on this screen. But if you're going to be buying this laptop and mostly docked to your external display, then you could save yourself a couple £100 and go with the base panel, because it is still a good panel. It's just not as nice as this 360Hz panel that I've got here. So one of the questions I get asked an awful lot of the time on the channel is, how do I get the best out of this laptop? How do I get the most out of it and tweak it for performance? Now, the good thing is, when you buy an Alienware laptop, you don't get a lot of bloatware on the device, so you don't have to uninstall much software at all to get yourself up and running. That's nice. And you've also got the Alienware Updates, which is a one-click piece of software which will update all the drivers from Dell's website to save you searching for the drivers yourself. Now, you'll still probably want to go to NVIDIA and get your NVIDIA drivers from them directly, because they're always much more up-to-date than Dell. But at least if you get them from Dell, you know they're going to be stable drivers that have been tested on this machine. So the first thing you do when you get this laptop and you've signed into it, you go to the Alienware Update, you search, you get the latest drivers and the BIOS, and it installs the lot, and then you know your machine is up to date. Then finally, just run the Windows Update and just get your Windows patches, and you're good to go. So your machine's up to date, and you've got some games installed on here. You want to start playing. Well, the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to go to Alienware Command Center and have a look at the profiles. Now, although I'm always moaning about Alienware Command Center, one of the great things it does have is different profiles that you can choose to change the way your laptop performs. So if you're going to be in a classroom or in a room around other people, you want it to be quiet, you pop it on silent mode. It will throttle your system down a little bit, but it keeps the fan noises down. Balance mode is a great all-rounder. What you'll find if you're gaming, you won't get the maximum performance out of the 3080 Ti that I've got in this card here, whereas it should get up to 175 watts. In balance, you'll probably only find about 130 to maybe 140 at best. And also the CPU is throttled back a little bit as well. Most games, especially on a 1080p panel, will run absolutely perfectly on balance mode, and the fans will be much more pleasant to your ears and the people around you. But if you want the maximum performance out of this machine, my favourite way to do this is either to hit max fans in the Alienware Command Center. That absolutely maxes out everything on this machine when you're running it. Or my favourite way of doing it is press the function F1 key on the keyboard. So you don't even need to open Command Center to do this. And this basically enables max fans and pumps everything at maximum wattages. So if you're gaming, you'll hit your 175 watts on this 3080 Ti, and the CPU will easily be, well, on my game loads, usually about 60 to 70 watts. And the system absolutely handles it perfectly. Now, yes, the temperatures do creep up. These 12th gens, they do get quite hot, but this system copes beautifully with it. And also in Alienware Command Center, we have the OC1 and the OC2 overclock options. But if I'm honest, they only overclock the graphics card, and only a tiny amount, that they're just not worth using. So in my opinion, don't bother with that OC1 or OC2 at all. At the end of the video, I will discuss Afterburner to overclock your GPU and get much more out of it. Now that leads me to the next question that I get asked all the time, and it is, the CPUs run incredibly hot. I've seen it hit 100 degrees centigrade. And yes, it does. Sometimes this CPU will boost as much as it can, and they'll let it absolutely run free and boost up to 160 watts at times, which will pump that temperature right up there, up to often 100 degrees centigrade. Now these machines and these chips are built to handle that temperature. And of all the years I've been running Alienware, this has always been something that Alienware have done. They've allowed their chips to run max wattages and get the temperatures quite high. Now, if you buy something like a Razer blade, the temperatures will be much cooler. But the reason that they are cooler is because Razer throttle the CPU back much quicker. They will put a TDP cap on that CPU at maybe 65 watts, so that you'll never get into those 80s, 90s, and 100 degrees centigrades, but you're also not getting the maximum performance out of that chip. Now, Dell, on the other hand, they give you the maximum performance out of the chip at the cost of temperature. Now, me personally, I don't mind this. I know these CPUs are rated well over 100 degrees C, and I've never had one die on heat yet. And until that time, I'm quite happily running it at 100 Cs. But if you're not happy with that, there are ways around it. The first thing that you can do is in this BIOS of this machine, Dell have got something in here called TCC, which is the thermal control circuit. Now, this is the sort of the switch at which it starts throttling back that CPU to keep your temperatures down. Now, by default, in the TCC, it'll be on 0. And what that means is, by 0, there's no offset. So at 100 degrees centigrade, it will start throttling. But until it gets to 100 degrees centigrade, it's going to keep boosting. Now, if you're not happy with those temperatures, you can change the TCC offset anywhere from 0 to 15. And what that will do is put an offset off that 100 degrees centigrade. So as an example, if you put in 10, it will start bringing your temperatures back down and throttling the CPU at 90 degrees centigrade. And obviously 15 would be 85. So if you aren't comfortable with these high temperatures that these CPUs can run at, go into your TCC and BIOS, put in a 10 or a 15 value. You get a little bit less CPU performance. It's not a massive amount, but you get much cooler temperatures. And this is something that people are always saying to me, they don't like the 100 degrees centigrade. Well, straight away, that's an easy way you can bring those down. Now, there are other ways as well. You can undervolt your GPU, and this is something we can look at in a future video. Drop your comments down below if that's something you want to look at. I regularly do this. You can also set VSync on your games to the screen cap or to a lower level. And what that will do is it will stop your CPU and GPU boosting. It will keep it to a specified number of frames per second. And therefore, it's not pushing your system 100%, bringing those temperatures down. And my last tip to sort of keeping this system cool is to have your rear end of your laptop elevated to allow much extra air cooling in underneath. Because although the ventilation is great in this system, you've got vents through the keyboards, at the top of the keyboard and underneath, they do sit very flat to the desk, as most gaming laptops do. Just by raising the back end of this laptop up a little bit, just allows it much more room to breathe and brings those temperatures down. Now lastly, before we sign off today, I just want to quickly talk about Msi Afterburner. Now, I have done videos on this in the past, but this is something that so many people ask me. Firstly, how can you overclock your GPU? Well, that's going to be Msi Afterburner. Secondly, how do I have all the stats on the screen like you do when you're running your benchmarks? Well, this Riva tuner, which is included with Msi Afterburner. So we're going to have a quick look at this tonight to see how we can set this up to show you the temperatures on your screen when you're gaming. So if you want to monitor your system as you're using it, this is the best way to do so. Okay, so I'm going to put the link description below to Msi Afterburner, so you can quickly download and follow the prompts to install both Msi Afterburner and Riva Tuner, because you're going to need both of those for this next section. Now, first thing first, I'm going to show you how to actually set up the on-screen display that we use, which is Riva Tuner that comes bundled in this Msi Afterburner. So what we need to do, we open up Msi Afterburner. I'm going to click on the settings icon. Now, firstly, spot which is your NVIDIA GPU. In this case, it's GPU 1, NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3070 Ti. Because bear in mind, if you've got Optimus enabled, you're going to be able to see the Intel onboard graphics as well. So we know this is GPU 1 we need. We're going to click onto monitoring. Now, I have already set mine up because I use this all the time. But for everything that you want to show onto your actual display, we're going to highlight it, and then you're going to tick Show On-Screen Display. So I like to show my GPU1 temperature, my GPU1 usage, and then come down, my GPU1 memory usage. Then I like to show my GPU1 core clock, memory clock, and the actual power in wattage that this card is pulling. I also like to show some of the CPU statistics as well, so I can see how much my CPU has been used and the wattage it's pulling. Now you can actually show every individual core with this program, but that will take up a lot of space on your screen. So what I like to do is I like to just use the actual CPU temperature. So I'm not using the actual cores, I'm using the whole CPU. And the same when it comes to usage. I'm only showing the whole CPU usage, not the core usage. And lastly, I like to show my CPU clocks and CPU power. So then pretty much all the important things I like to see when I'm gaming on my CPU is shown. I also show the RAM usage, so how much of my actual RAM is committed. And then lastly, by default, it doesn't actually show the frame rate in Msi Afterburner. If you want to show the frame rate, you highlight your frame rate in this monitoring tab. We click the little tick beside it, and then you make sure you show it on screen display like we have with all the others. And also, you've got maybe your minimum. You might want to have your frame rate average. I'm going to highlight that, tick that, and show on my on-screen display. So everything that you want to see, you make sure is enabled in here. When you've finished, you click Apply, you click OK, and that will now show on your screen. And you'll see that you have a RivaTuner Statistics tab in your notifications menu. And if I double click that, in here, we can do things like we can change the size of the actual text. You can change the location that the text is going to show on the screen, or how far in you'd like to put this in here. I like to put mine in 500, so it shows about the middle of the screen when I've got my sort of text sort of blown up a little bit, and that's comfortable for me to see without usually covering any of the actual game information that I need to see. And just lastly, I want to quickly discuss overclocking, because as I mentioned, overclocking in Alienware Command Center with the OC1, OC2 profiles is pretty pointless. I like to do my overclocking in Msi Afterburner and then using the stats to actually monitor it. I like to start by increasing the core clock. I usually start with a 100 because that's pretty safe for most of the GPUs I've tested. And then I'll go up in slower increments until I hit to the point where I start getting some artifacts. And I'll use TimeSpy and Firestrike to test that. Once I'm completely happy with the core, I'll then work on the memory. Maybe put 200-300 megahertz on the memory. Fully test it, and then I'll run a few of my games and make sure it's completely and utterly stable. Once it's stable, and I've got my core and my memory at what I would like to keep it at, say 125 on my core and 200 on my memory in this case. I haven't really spent a lot of time testing this model. I'm going to hit apply, and I'm going to hit the save button. I'm going to save that as a profile. I'm using profile 1. So you can have up to 5 profiles saved for different overclocks that you've tested and you're happy with. And then from there on in, load up your Msi Afterburner, choose your profile, and game away with your overclock settings. So hopefully these little tips have helped you tonight. If you've got any questions, or if you've got any thoughts on what we've talked about, please pop them down in the comment section down below. I will get back to you. I love reading everything that you do put in there. We've got an awful lot more content coming up soon, so please make sure you hit that subscribe and the notification bell so that you are notified on all our upcoming releases. It's a great time of the year with all these 12th gen gaming laptops coming out, so plenty more reviews on the way. And lastly, thank you for watching.